The 2026 NFL Draft is loaded with outstanding defensive secondary players at the top of the class. Let's dive into the 5 best players in the secondary in this year's draft class. Welcome to another episode. I'm Warren Sharp. This is Sharp Football Analysis, and I'm joined by draft expert Ryan McCrystal, who is known for being accurate with his prognostications, understanding what GMs value and where they're going to draft players. Case in point, big boards are the top 100 players taken in each draft. Ryan McCrystal has not only the #1 most accurate score in big board history, according to the Huddle Report. He's ranked #1 most accurate as recently as 2021 and currently ranks #7 most accurate in the country in terms of his big board accuracy over the last 5 years. So he's a great expert to bring on to talk about all of these elite players in the secondary that we're going to be seeing drafted in the first round and probably making impacts in the NFL before we know it. So let's get right into it, Ryan. Let's start with the #1 best player in the secondary for you, and it's none other than Caleb Downs out of Ohio State. What makes him so special?
Yeah, Downs is the #1 overall player on my big board at any position. I think he's just that special. I think he's a really unique talent. He just kind of does everything. I mean, he plays the run like a linebacker, despite the fact that he's not even that big for a safety. And he's probably at his best when he's reading the quarterback. So you could certainly play him in the deep secondary, let him read the quarterback and be a ball hawk, but he's also great around the line of scrimmage. If there's a weakness to his game, you could say maybe he's not quite as quick as some of the slot receivers that you might ask him to guard if you were to slide him over into the slot, but he's going to be able to handle matchups with most tight ends. He just kind of does it all. To me, I see him as potentially being the next Eric Weddle, and I know that's really high praise. Maybe he doesn't quite reach that Hall of Fame type ceiling. But when Weddle was at his peak, you could argue that he was the best strong safety or the best free safety in the league, depending on where he was lining up on any given play. And that's what Downs has been in college football over the last few years. He's been the best at both of those roles. And because he does it with his football IQ in so many ways, I think that translates really well. The guy, he has the traits, there's no doubt about it, but the guys who make the smoothest transition to the league and the guys who are the safest prospects are the guys who are already winning with their ability to anticipate at the college level. And to add another layer to that, one of the things that adds to my confidence, he was a very rare player who, as a safety, was making a huge impact with his football intelligence as a freshman. He was at Alabama his freshman year playing for Nick Saban. Nick Saban is not quick to trust freshmen, especially in the secondary, a position that he coached very closely. And yet Downs was arguably the best secondary in the country as a true freshman at Alabama, taking on a lot of responsibilities in that defense. Saban trusted him as one of the on-field leaders as a true freshman, and that says a lot about how smart he is as a player. And so he has the physical traits, and when you add that type of football intelligence to, the type of athlete that he is, it raises the floor almost to, I would say, a Pro Bowl level. If he isn't perennially in the conversation as one of the better safeties in the league, I would be very surprised. I think he is not just a special safety, but a special prospect overall.
So high praise from Ryan. Not only is Caleb Downs the #1 player in the secondary in this year's class, he's Ryan's #1 player on his big board. And I love it. If you guys go over to sharpfootballanalysis.com and read Ryan's big board, for every single player, he lists great team fits for that player. And for Caleb Downs, he just listed every team because he thinks every team would be lucky to have a player like Caleb Downs. And based on the way Ryan talks him up, I cannot disagree. Let's talk about Ryan's #2 best player in the secondary in this year's draft class, Dillon Thieneman, safety out of Oregon. What makes he so special?
Yeah, Thieneman is ranked really high for me for similar reasons to Caleb Downs, and that he can kind of do it all. He originally started playing at Purdue and was playing mostly an off safety, deep safety role for them. And they often used him as the single high safety in their defense. And he just had so much range in the deep secondary. They played him very deep, and he was so quick to read quarterbacks that they could play him deep to sort of increase the range that he had covering the deep ball. But he was so quick to read the quarterback that he could also come in and close very quickly on some of the shorter throws. And he really thrived in that role. Then he transferred to Oregon, where they used him more as a strong safety. He actually played in the box quite a bit at Oregon, which we hadn't seen him do a ton of at Purdue. And it was as if he'd been doing it his whole life. He stepped into that role seamlessly and was a huge asset for that defense in that role at Oregon. And so seeing him do both of those things at such a high level, it raises the ceiling. The more you can do, especially at safety, it allows defensive coordinators to sort of mix and match depending on his personnel. If you got a guy that can play at a high level in multiple spots, it raises the level of the whole defense because it allows you to put the best players, the best defensive backs out there in different roles and, avoid bad matchups when you can move guys around like that. The question that you might have about Thieneman is the fact that he hasn't played in coverage in the slot very often. If he's going to play the strong safety role, that might be a concern because a lot of teams will have their strong safety also take on some slot coverage responsibilities. And the fact that he hasn't done that is a concern. Obviously, you're always going to have a little bit of doubt when he hasn't done it yet, but he helped himself a lot at the combine. He tested exceptionally well. So seeing that he has the athletic traits of somebody who should thrive in slot coverage definitely eases some of that concern. He hasn't done it, so that's going to be a question mark on his resume, but you can at least feel good that he has the traits that you can mold into that role. And the fact that you already saw him make a transition from playing one role at Purdue to playing a brand new role at Oregon and making that transition so quickly, it should also ease some concerns because obviously that says something about his work ethic to learn a new role so quickly after transferring. It should make you feel confident that he's going to be able to come into a new defense in the NFL and also pick up on things quickly. So he's among my top 10 overall prospects in this year's class because of that versatility and because of how quickly I think he adjusts to the NFL and plays a key role.
So the top two players in the secondary are both safeties, which obviously is a position that has increasing value with the heavier personnel groupings that some of these offenses are pivoting to a little bit. Now let's talk about the third best player in the secondary in this year's draft class, and he's the first cornerback off the board. Mansoor Delane out of LSU. What makes him special?
Yeah, Delane's a ball hawk. He does a great job of reading the quarterback when he's in zone coverage and just getting into position to make a play on the ball. So I would feel much better about him if he lands with a team that plays a very high rate of zone coverage, because if there's a concern about him, it's maybe that his athletic traits aren't great. There will be certain matchups where quicker receivers are able to, especially if he's in a one-on-one matchup without a lot of help over the top, there could be some matchups that aren't great for him. But that said, he does play a very physical style of football. So teams that want to play a lot of press coverage might be comfortable using him in that role and asking him to play some man coverage so long as there's enough help over the top. I could see certain teams that play a little bit more man liking that physical style of play. So he does have some scheme versatility, even though I would prefer using him in zone coverage because I think his ability to read the quarterback and get into position to play the ball is just so valuable in that role that he could really be an asset in terms of forcing turnovers if you're playing him in that type of scheme. So the reason why he's likely going to be drafted so high is that he is scheme versatile, though. Almost every type of team should have some interest in him because whatever you want him to do, he should be able to do that in your defense.
All right, the fourth best secondary player in this year's draft is cornerback Avieon Terrell out of Clemson. Talk to us a little bit about what Terrell brings to the table and where you think he's going to transition in terms of talent into the NFL.
Yeah, Avieon Terrell, the younger brother of AJ Terrell, former first-round pick, who's had a decent career in Atlanta. I think he's actually further along than AJ Terrell was at this stage, even though Terrell, his older brother, did end up being a high pick. It was a little bit of a surprise on draft day. I think Terrell is a little bit more, I would feel like a team would be justified taking him high, although I was a little critical of the Falcons when they did that. It's worked out okay, though. He's had a decent career. And I think Avieon, the younger brother, has an even higher ceiling that he could reach in the NFL. He's so aggressive. You can tell he sort of has he plays with the style of, you can kind of tell he has an older brother in the NFL, or that he has, NFL bloodlines, like they like to say, because he has so much confidence on the field. You can tell that he sees the routes developing. He anticipates really well. And that's what he needs, that because he's not the biggest, most physical cornerback, but he likes to play aggressive because he trusts himself so much. Now, there could be some downside to that. He'll give up some big plays, and I would imagine as a rookie especially, he'll probably will give up some big plays and get beat deep when he's a little bit overconfident against a good receiver who knows how to set him up and then take advantage of a misstep here or there. There probably will be some growing pains. But I love the style of play that he has. And I also like his versatility. That always bumps somebody up my board when you could see them playing multiple roles in the defense. And the fact that Terrell can line up on the outside or can line up in the slot, I think it eases some of the concerns that you might have about his size, especially because if you can move him around, it's a little bit easier to put him in a position where you move him out of certain matchups and don't have him going up against certain receivers that might cause him more trouble, because you can line him up in different spots in the defense to put him in a position to succeed, which I think raises a floor when you've got a guy that can move around like that and get into the right situation. So Terrell's a guy that I think could come in. I think he's a scheme versatile guy who can come in, and the aggressive nature is going to set a pretty high ceiling for him, even if you have to live with some growing pains early on from getting beat by those mistakes.
Rounding out the top 5 players in the secondary in this year's draft class is Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. Talk to us a little bit about what makes him special and his transition to the NFL.
Yeah, this one's a little bit more of a gamble because the production in college, you could argue, hasn't quite lived up to being ranked this high, but I like what I see from Brandon Cisse. He's a physical corner who played a lot of press coverage in college, and I think he has the traits to continue thriving in that role in the NFL. So maybe he's a little bit less scheme versatile. You could argue that, he has a little bit more value to the teams that want to play him in that press man coverage and take advantage of his physical style of play. I would argue he probably can handle any scheme, though, because he does have ball hawk traits, and that's the one knock that you might hear on him, because he only had 2 interceptions in college, which is a little bit of a red flag for a guy who's played a decent amount of football. You'd much rather draft a cornerback who gets his hands on the ball and creates turnovers. I would push back on saying he's not good at that, though, because like I said, he played a lot of man coverage, played a lot of press coverage. That scheme produces fewer turnovers. It's when you're turning your back to the quarterback more often when you're in that scheme. And so you're going to get your hands on the ball less often. There's fewer turnover opportunities there. Based on route adjusted data, Cisse generated a ball hawk rate 36% above expected over the course of his career. That's phenomenal. That's one of the best rates in this class. So to do that while playing a scheme that doesn't necessarily create a ton of opportunities, I think that shows that he has a really high ceiling there, that if you did put him into a situation where he was playing in zone coverage more often, he has shown an ability to get his hands on the ball. The fact that he hasn't had the interceptions, the fact that he's generating that ball hawk rate shows that it probably would come with time. If you put him in a situation where he's playing in a scheme that produces more interceptions, he's probably going to be able to do that because we've seen him produce at such a high level relative to the scheme that he's played in. So I'm less concerned about that based on those numbers, because the traits are there. Like, he has the physical style of play. He certainly has the speed, the size, the length to get his hands on the ball. I think that will come with time. Maybe he's more of a developmental prospect than some of the other guys that we've talked about so far, but I think we've seen enough of him in college that you bet on the traits and you bet on that ball hawk rate as sort of a sticky skill there, much more so than interceptions, which can be really volatile. I would bet on him taking his game to another level in the NFL, especially if he lands in a good situation with a coach who can really develop the traits that he certainly has.
So that rounds out the top 5 best players in the secondary, according to Ryan McCrystal. But a name that's absent here is Jermod McCoy out of Tennessee, who missed the 2025 season due to an ACL, which is therefore going to increase the variance that some people have. Some people have him a little bit higher on their boards. You don't. You have him a little bit lower. Talk to us a little bit about some of the concerns that you have about him as a prospect and where you see him slotting into the NFL.
Yeah, the injury is a factor here as far as why I don't have him ranked as high. If you wanted to argue with me that he has the highest ceiling of all the cornerbacks in this year's class, I wouldn't put up too much of a fight. I certainly see it. On his best plays, he looks exceptional. He could certainly turn into a real ball hawk, and I could see him being the type of cornerback who, as he refines his skill set, becomes the type of corner that you could trust on an island. And obviously there's not too many guys who can handle that responsibility. I do think he has that ceiling, but he really only had one strong year in college. He started his career at Oregon State. He was pretty good, showed some flashes, attracted to Tennessee, became attracted to that and wanted to try to develop him. He had a good year in his first year in the SEC, but it was up and down. I mean, if you go back to Tennessee's game against Ohio State in the playoff, he did not belong on the same field as Ohio State's receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate, 3 guys that he's going to see in the NFL next year, and he did not belong on the same field as them. And then right after that game, he gets hurt and he ends up not playing in his final season. So the fact that cornerback is the most volatile position there is in the sport, I think. And you've got a guy who had one strong year, then had an ACL injury. That's just not someone I'm going to bet on. As much as I like the ceiling, I'm going to spend a day 2 pick on that player. I am not spending a first round pick on a guy with only one really strong year in college and then had an ACL injury. So I have some real strong concerns about any team that's going to invest that type of draft capital in him, if indeed he does come off the board as high as potentially the top 20, like he is in some mock drafts. To me, that's just too rich to spend on a guy who just hasn't really proven it yet and is coming off an injury.
Look, I appreciate that perspective and you elaborating on him. So thanks very much for that. And for more from Ryan and all of our NFL experts covering the 2026 draft, head over to sharp.football and sign up for the free mailing list so that you can get all the newsletters that we send out with great analysis covering the draft. We'll see you on the next one.